were talking last week about different NRV tools. How do you think NRV could support any of these? Anybody?
You can go.
Go ahead.
Right, so I think that for NRV, you're pretty much evaluating the resources that may be impacted in case of environmental degradation. The EbA would come in as a...
Hold on, the NRV just values the resource, not in case of degradation. It just, what is the value of this resource as is?
Right.
And if you were to make a decision around the resource where you utilize the resource for some development purpose, how would the ecosystem gain or lose value as a result of that development?
Mm-hmm.
Right,
okay. So in the case of the EbA, I believe it would come as a method of mitigation, or a method to, help to preserve the environment. So in the case of mangroves, or for protection of the coastline, as you would have mentioned before, we could, plant more mangroves so that the value of that resource and what it does for the environment is preserved, I think. So, the whole issue of climate change might be reduced.
Okay, let's look at some why it's important, and I think we have been discussing it throughout. When undertaking EbA, we want our decision makers to be aware of the current economic value of ecosystems, the values that can be gained by society for restoring and conserving these ecosystems, the link with climate change, how the ecosystems can, if we restore certain ecosystems, how, for example, it will contribute to climate change adaptation. If we value ecosystems, it also provides a basis for justifying certain activities, restoring the resilience, ecological, economic productivity of the ecosystem. So it's really adding to the whole supporting decision-making around EbA. So knowing the value of your ecosystems can help support how we introduce EbA, why we introduce EbA, and the importance of, so we know the importance of EbAs, but the NRV providing the value and telling you the lost value, if you were to do X and Y, also provides a plug in terms of how we scale up EbAs. Okay. And when you're looking at NRV, you're not just looking at the present, but you're also looking at the future value of the particular ecosystem as well. So that's where, for example, the whole notion in NRV of cost benefit analysis comes in as well. So this is just an example, a very loose example, an example of what I keep referring to as total economic value. So when we think of any ecosystem, that ecosystem has two types of values. It has use values and non-use values. And within each of those categories, there are subcategories. So they have each ecosystem has direct use values, indirect use values, and option values. Right? So this is their use values. And under these direct use values, for example, we refer to it as the direct benefits from use of the goods of the ecosystems. So you may be looking at things like, what is the direct value of food coming from the ecosystem? So if we were to think of a forest, what is the direct value? If we were to look at an ecosystem, say in Blue and John Crow Mountain, What is the direct value of food? Can we value the food coming from the forest? What is the value of the biomass? What's the value of the wood products? What is the value of recreation and tourism in that particular ecosystem? So it's things that we directly use and consume that oftentimes we could place a market value on. So it's usually very easy to determine the direct use values of ecosystems. So in here, for example, we could have put bauxite. Do you think that's a direct use value? Because it's usually goods that could be purchased in a marketplace. So we could have had, for example, food here could be, you know, your nuts, your seeds, your fruits, but it could also be fish, for example, fish and shellfish. Each natural resource has indirect use values, which we refer to as functional benefits, and many of the regulatory services of the natural environment fall under indirect use values. So we may have things like regulatory services, provisioning services. So NWC, for example, benefits from the indirect use value of natural resources because it taps into, no pun intended, the provisioning services of ecosystems such as watersheds to get fresh water, right? There are also support services that fall under indirect use value. For example, the quality of the soil is a support service. Can we put a value on the quality of soil by determining the value, for example, of agriculture? Then we have something referred to as option value, right? Which is direct and indirect value. So this is the value today. What is the future, both direct and indirect use value of this particular ecosystem? Then we have something called non-use value. So what is the value? So we have bequest value and we have existence value. So when we think of bequest values, we look at it as the value for future generations, bearing in mind that we're all part of a future generation because the generation is about 21 years old, 21 years, sorry. So your bequest value. So there is how much do we want for future generations? What is the value of air quality, carbon storage, cultural services, such as scenery, landscape, etc. Then there is this value called existence value. This is just the value of knowing that the natural resource exists and it can continue to exist. So value of existence without use. So we're looking here, for example, is where we would include things like habitats and biodiversity, wildlife, species, genetic resources, ecosystems, and a country's cultural identity. Can we prepare the total economic value of, say, some named ecosystems? Can we plug in these into some named ecosystem? So the TEV in sort of general terms really refers to the different types of economic values. Each of these correspond to the different use that is made of the ecosystem. All right. Are we able to plug in? Like I have some examples, but I would like you to do it yourselves. So this is the TEV of a coral reef, for example. And this is the TEV of a wetland. All right. And this is the idea of a TEV. And if I were to ask you to plug this into like 3 or 4 different, if we looked at a watershed, a wetland, and a coral reef, can we prepare a total economic value? And then we use that exercise throughout today to look and see from this TEV, how then do we value each of these different uses that the ecosystem provides to us? Is that doable?
Yes, it is.
Anybody else? So just to say, and to elaborate a little more, your use value, what is your use value? It relates to the actual use of the goods or services produced by the environment, by the ecosystem, right? And of course, it can either be direct or indirect. And of course, it can also, you want to have the option to have that value in the future. Everybody with me? You all seem very quiet. I just want to add that under direct use values, we have something called consumptive direct use values and non-consumptive direct use values. And if we were to look at this list, what would be your consumptive use values under direct use values?
Food.
Consumptive use. So we're looking at direct use. We're just looking at that column to your left. And we're saying under direct use, we have two types of uses. We have consumptive direct use and non-consumptive direct use. What would be some examples of the consumptive direct use and why? And some examples of the non-consumptive direct use and why? Shauna? Shauna Lee, your hand
Does
is up.
that, if it has anything to do with like literal consumption, I'm assuming the food
Yes,
would be a
it has
part
to
of
do with extraction
consumptive.
and consumption, you're correct. So what there would be consumptive direct use?
Well, I think the
I
wood
was
products
mentioning the
would definitely be consumptive because you'd have to remove the trees, for example, in order to make, the timber and to create fuel. So I think consumptive would involve it being removed from the
It will involve
ecosystem.
extracting and
Right.
harvesting of the
Yes.
product. So for example, it would include things like harvesting of fish, either for consumption, either for eating or harvesting it, for example, for recreational purposes. It may include, as you said, extracting of timber and forest products, harvesting of fruits. But what would be the non-consumptive? Actually, abstraction of water as well. Surface water or groundwater would be an example of a direct use value. But what about indirect use values? Sorry, non-consumptive direct use values. So we said consumptive direct use was actually getting the resource. So whether it was harvesting of the fish or harvesting of the lumber, etc. What do you think would constitute a non-consumptive direct use value?
I'm thinking using the examples you have here, the recreation would fall under that.
But
It's the
what
use of
about
the
the
space.
recreation?
It's the use
Because
of this.
what about it? Because we had said before, harvesting of fish, either for commercial or recreational purposes was an example of a consumptive direct use value. So what about the recreation now would be non-consumptive? You're going down a correct track, but you need to elaborate.
Right. So based on what you said, the focus for the consumptive direct use is the harvesting, the actual removal for whatever is the use that you shared before. But in the case of like the recreation, just enjoying the space where nothing in particular is taken, but there is that gain of enjoyment from being within the space. So you're not necessarily removing or getting the particular resource, but it is providing a particular benefit.
Okay, so it's like using surface waters for swimming, right? But sorry, for the purposes of transportation, for example. Or it could be recreational swimming. We're not taking anything, we're just swimming. It could be bird watching in a protected area. That's an example of a non-consumptive direct use value. And it could also be, for example, hydropower production if we don't divert the water to anywhere, for example. right? They generate economic values and are non-consumptive. So the sum of these two, direct plus indirect, will give us the use value of a resource. All right. Then we went on to discuss indirect use values. Anything anyone wants to add for indirect use values? Anything? So it's really functional benefits, as we said before, right? Anything anyone wants to add on these? So I'm actually asking you now, should I put you in groups for like 20 minutes to actually define, and I'm just going to give you an example, something that looks like this for any one of 3 ecosystems. Would that be okay?
Yep. Yep, yep.
So room 1, I'm gonna call you watersheds. Room 2, you are the wetland. And room 3, you are the coral reef. Because once you do it and you do it properly, we're then going to be able to plug in how we determine the actual value of these ecosystems. I'm going to open all rooms. Oh, but I don't want to assign you all. I want you to just go. So you all can just join, right? If I just are you all seeing the room?
No.
No.
No, I'm not.
Okay, okay, I'm gonna allow you to choose rooms. Okay. No, I'm automatically move all participants. Okay. Are you in rooms? Are you seeing if you're in rooms?
No.
I am not seeing where I am placed in a room.
Okay, doing something kind of odd. So I'm just gonna assign you very quickly. Are people being assigned? You're seeing that? Are persons
You're
seeing
not
where
seeing
they're
anything
assigned?
here.
No, not
No.
I'm not
No.
seeing anything
No.
here.
Yeah, but I see some people in watersheds. Are people going into the rooms that they are assigned to?
I'm not seeing any room for me or any option to join a room.
Nobody is seeing an option to join a room?
No, I'm still
No,
not seeing
I'm not
either.
seeing anything.
No, I'm not
Not
seeing.
seeing
No.
anything.
Okay, Nadine, I'm going to put you in a room and tell me if you see it. Are you seeing yourself assigned to a room? Nadine? Are people moving? Anna, are you seeing people moving out of the thing? Yeah, because people are joining, right? Are people, Anna, are people out of the meeting room?
I'm not sure if it's that slow.
I think
I'm
Nadine
see-
joined the room.
Yeah, it's
Because I'm not
happening
seeing
just
her.
slowly.
Yeah, I'm seeing the assignments. I think because you have to be doing it manually, it might take a while.
Yeah, it's just slow. It's happening, but very slowly.
I'm not in a room or seeing any
Still
option.
not in a room here.
I don't see a room for me either.
Liz, do you need me to help you with the assignments?
Probably, because
Right.
somehow I'm not getting back watersheds. If like you can assign to watershed, okay. Okay, I'm gonna assign Chinar now. I was trying. Did I just assign? Oh, you're helping me?
Yeah, I'm doing it randomly though.
Yeah, please do. I don't know why I didn't do it automatically. I just wanted it to do it automatically. And I nearly assigned you, Anna. I think everybody should be in now. All right. So.
Hi, hello. I was in the wetlands group. Can I be put back in that group, please? I fell off.
Also, there are some people here still not assigned. Let me go back. Kimberly is not assigned.
And Orlando, are you seeing a group that you should be joining?
Kimberly. I think she has an audio problem.
Yeah, not seeing. Orlando, are you there?
That's good, but I have a question.
Go ahead, Christina.
How do you when you're doing your valuation, how do you account for double counting?
Ah.
Because you have for example, you can have supply of water as a provisional service, but you also have supply of water as a non-use value. So you could be supplying water that you're not using, but you're also supplying water that you're using.
But
How
why
do
would
you
it be a non-use? Remember, non-use speaks to future use, right?
Yeah. But how do you
Okay, so you're not the water you use, the value where the indirect use value would be the value of providing the water today, right? Let's say for the next 10 years, but do we want to provide water for a future generation, for example? So 21 years from now, what would be the value of that water?
Okay.
So you're not really
All right.
double counting per se.
Okay, thank you. I understand now.
So do you all have it in any way that you can throw it up, or like you can share your screen, or it was just a discussion? I'm hoping it wasn't just a discussion. Somebody wrote something.
Coral reefs had something. Oh, yeah.
Anybody else? What about watersheds and wetlands?
Wetlands was a discussion that was written down in a physical notebook.
Or your physical. Anybody else? Watersheds?
Was just a discussion where Chino and Mr. Hunt is going to speak on it, but we don't have anything written down.
All right, so I have two examples. So let me see which ones I have. I have coral reef and I have wetland. So the coral reef persons had an example, right? You had your own thing?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and wetlands. So I will stop sharing and I will ask. I will ask you to start. So I'll go with coral reefs, with with watersheds first. So we'll hear what you have to say, and I will just put back up this generic slide so that we could all see what he's talking about, and then we could determine if there are things that he is missing. All right. Shinar, you were presenting.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, apologies, we didn't get any time to really populate the table. Yes. All right. So for watershed, we choose a particular watershed area. So we choose to go with the Rio Minho, which is really in close proximity to the cockpit country, right? So so really and truly, the direct use of the Rio Minho will take in consideration areas within the cockpit country and how, you know, person would benefit from the cockpit region and its environment. So direct use would involve like the non-timber forest products, which are directly consumable. These include like the food, the resin, the gum, and also in forms of medicine. In these regions, these persons mostly stick toward the traditional use of medicine, these traditional medicinal plants, so that's a big thing in that region, right? So the non-timber forest product will be the direct use of these products. We also have, timber will be used these products for also timber. Because a lot of, is a highly farming community and they use it for fence posts and stuff. Also for the indirect use, right? These will include like our water reservoir, really the cultural heritage, the green space, and also for carbon sink, the actual carbon sequestration.
So let me stop you there. Cultural heritage and so on is more, I think I can't remember who was talking this morning about it. It's more like existence value. It's a non-use value. It's not a direct use value. So what I want us to always remember is that the indirect use value of the resource really relates to some of the is very much related to regulatory services.
Could you repeat that again, Ms. Emmanuel, about the cultural?
Sure. The cultural is more an existence value. It's a non-use value. It's a value saying that we want the resource to be there. So everybody who is an environmentalist values existence values. Somebody this morning was talking about it. I can't remember who now was talking about the value of, it wasn't green space, it was more the aesthetic value. So when we think of aesthetics, think about persons wanting the resource to exist because of aesthetic value, cultural heritage, etc. But if we think of cockpit country and we think of the Rio Minho watershed, so you said fresh water, the provision of fresh water, carbon storage would be there. What else?
Biodiversity in terms of the flora and the fauna. We have some endemic species there as well.
Okay, that's also existence value to a large extent. Okay. What about, does it have anything to do with like storm protection, flood control, anything
Yes.
like?
Well, not currently on this list, but seeing that you say it now, yes.
No, not because I say it. Tell me if
Yeah.
do you have
Yes, in terms of storms protection, definitely the tree cover will in terms of elevation, if we're looking at the cockpit country, the elevation is a little bit higher compared to surrounding communities. So it will definitely, shield places, especially from in the leeward side of the island. It will definitely act as a buffer in terms of storm surge or hurricane. So I do agree with that. All right, and I think that pretty much sums up what we discussed.
Okay, so what I want persons to always remember, right? You guys are the natural resource experts, you're the environmental managers, you're all of those things. So taking your knowledge and fitting it into this category. So this particular ecosystem, this coral reef, this is what it does. You understand? And then saying which one of the values does it correspond to? Does it correspond to direct use, indirect use, option, etc.? And then you can fit it in. You understand? Clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that was good. That was good. And we would recall those when we're looking at the different tools. So I'm going to ask you then, if we're looking at net factor, what aspect of your TEV would you value using net factor income? You understand? So we kind of touch on the NRV tool, and then you look back at your TEV and determine where, for example, can I plug in what particular value can I calculate using this particular NRV, this particular tool of NRV. Understood? Yeah.
Yes.
Now we have our coral reefs. You can go next. Do you want to share your screen? Because I can stop share and you share. Yeah. Where are the coral reefs?
Okay, yes, I'll share.
You can share, right?
Yes, I can. 1 second. You guys can see?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had under use values for direct value in terms of provisioning services, we had food, nursery for fishes. In terms of the cultural element, we have tourism / recreation, education / medicine. Under the indirect value on the use values for regulation, we have carbon storage, erosion control, coastal protection. Under bequest value, we have water quality. Under existence value, we have habitat biodiversity and cultural identity.
Anything she's missing? Do you think there are any? So in terms of indirect value, right? You said you had erosion control and coastal protection.
Yes.
Do you think that you could also put things like biological support, for example, to fisheries, other ecosystems? Do they provide biological support to other ecosystems? What other
Yes.
systems are in and around coral reefs that coral reefs provide biological support to?
They are I think some fauna, like animals live, survive, well, use corals for food, I think. And also a place, a habitat, I believe, to survive. I don't actually know the species of animals.
But it's habitat connectivity, I think. So it connects pelagic species with their nursery ground. It's an in-between area for lots of fish species.
So biological support, so you have regulation, you have biological support, you had coastal protection, coastline. They also protect other coastal ecosystems, right? Bequest value for your coral reef. You had water quality.
I'm kind of uncertain about this one. I was just going back over it. Water quality actually affects the coral reef. So if
exactly,
yeah,
it will be more things like bequest value, so habitat, biodiversity, cultural identity, where that is.
Yes.
Existence value would be, for example, the aesthetic of the reef. And then on the bequest, you'd be looking at things like species, habitats, and also the reef ecosystem also provides a way of life, right? So you could also look at that for a lot of people. So that's also an example of a bequest value.
Culture, okay.
It's like a way of life connected to the traditional use of the ecosystem. So more like a way of life. So like people who live on the sea or live in the sea kind of thing.
All right. So that's pretty much it.
Any comments from anyone on this? Anybody? No? All right, let's go to so you can stop sharing. Let's go to our other one, which would be the wetland.
Okay, so for wetlands, we decided to do an inland wetland, and we used the Black River morass. And for direct use, we have fishing. They do fishing within the Black River morass. It is also a direct use because it could be a source of peat that can be extracted. We didn't put logging because it's a protected area and you shouldn't be doing any logging in the Black River morass. And we also have extraction of endangered or endemic plants for medicinal usage. For non-direct use, we have tourism. So we have tours and safaris. We also have bird watching activities.
For
and it's also
indirect use?
Yes, for non-direct use.
No, so
I think
direct
cultural
direct,
services.
non-consumptive. That's what we had it as.
Non-consumptive direct use.
Oh, non-consumptive.
So your
direct use, sorry.
recreation, your spiritual, your cultural, your research, they're direct use, but they're non-consumptive. Indirect use now refers to things like the regulatory functions of your environment.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, team member. So we also had, it's used for non-consumptive direct use, is used for educational material for schools within the area, for tours. On the indirect use, we have it for water supply within the Black River watershed. It does a lot of carbon storage, which will then relate back to the direct use of peat. Flood control within the Black River area. It is also, for direct use, we also have irrigation supply for farms within the area. High bird diversity and nesting within the area, plant biodiversity. And for indirect tourism, because it's a watershed inland, the water flows downstream and then can be further used for, aqua recreational sites, as well as nutrient cycles. I don't know if I'm missing anything that my group members would like to add.
Anybody would like to add to Christina's presentation from her group? So on the screen, there's also
hydroelectricity. Also forgot hydroelectricity because it supplies a hydroelectric plant within the St. Elizabeth area. Sorry.
And where would you put that?
For hydroelectricity, it's not being extracted, so non-consumptive use.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody else in the group would like to add.
You included pest control?
No, I did not. Didn't include pest control or pollination. I guess it can be, depending on the different type of species in the area, because it has a lot of crocodiles and predator species, so it could be used as a form of pest control.
Okay.
We also have, sorry, I need to skip the page. Scenery, aesthetic value. People really love the area and the greenery that it provides. We also have habitat and biodiversity. It's a home for many species, both aquatic and non-aquatic, and it supports wildlife. Okay, now I think I'm done.
All right, thanks, Christina. So this is, so in determining, this is the first step of undertaking a natural resource valuation of a named ecosystem. Himar?
A question. All right, so how would we account for a resource, for instance, that is in use but might no longer be desirable? So let me illustrate. So let us say there is a well that is in use, but it has become, it is becoming too costly to continue its use. And there are considerations to utilizing another well nearby, but that final decision has not been made yet.
And that's the ecosystem?
It's a natural resource.
Okay.
All right. Even if the well is not
Is the well a natural resource? No, is the well an ecosystem? Because what you want to value is the water coming into the well, right?
Right. All right.
And the water is coming from where?
From the well.
No, but where does the well get its water from?
Underground water source, rivers.
And what's the issue with the, so is the issue the resort? What is the ecosystem? The ecosystem is the river?
Yeah.
And the river is the issue?
All right.
What's the issue?
The point I'm trying to get at is the particular resource, right? It is in use as a direct use, but as the situation is, there are plans to discontinue that use because.
Yeah, but I've had a difficulty because is the well an ecosystem? I don't think so.
All right, I don't want you to dwell on the well because that might have been a poor illustration. But just imagine that whatever the resource is, or that ecosystem is, right? It is no longer, it is becoming no longer feasible to utilize.
Okay,
But
so
at the
why
same
would
time,
you say it's no longer feasible?
I have a question. What if, yeah, so for that same dam or
No, before you go there, right, before you ask, I asked one, why, what would make you say it's no longer feasible?
it's
What
becoming,
criteria are you using to say the natural resource is no longer feasible? Is it completely degraded?
it could be the cost associated
With what?
with its usage.
Okay, but what services does it provide? And what services did it provide before it became degraded like that?
If we look, let me see.
Oh, before you continue, I'm going to ask Deontay, because your hand was up and you were going to ask something. Deontay?
yes, I'm just wondering, based on the same question, when, for instance, we have such man-made resources, how would you use the same total economic value system that we have here? How would you actually put it back as a natural resource, or how would you recreate its value back into like a natural resource, for instance?
Repeat your question. Because remember, NRV is about valuing the natural environment, right? So repeat your question again for me.
That's the thing. I'm just wondering. So we have a man-made resource at this point, using our, for instance, the wetland, or for instance, our river. So in essence, if he's saying that, for instance, this man-made resource that we now have, it's just not feasible. It's not feasible at this point to keep using it. How can you use it now how can it be just reutilize a natural resource and then become of some value at this point?
But is it a natural resource? That's a question I'm asking.
Yeah, that's
Why
what
are
I'm trying.
you all conflating we're looking at valuing ecosystems. So coming back to Kamar's other point, so this ecosystem is
It's a river.
we're saying that he changed from his well to an arbitrary ecosystem that is degraded. The question is, you would now have to determine, one, what are the services that the ecosystem now provides? So you're saying that as it is now, the services are X, Y, Z. But if we were to rehabilitate, for example, what would be the flow of services that that ecosystem could provide? And what would be the benefits to society? So let's say we have a totally degraded section of a watershed, all right? Should we then go and should we then go and put houses on that before determining if we were to retrofit it, if we were to engage in restoration of that space, what would be the benefits to the persons downstream from that space? And what have been the impacts of that particular ecosystem on the communities downstream from that watershed? So that's the kind of analysis you'll have to do. So should we now invest funds to utilize this resort, to rehabilitate this resort, this particular forested area? Should we rehabilitate it so that it can provide benefits to communities around? It can reduce flooding. It will become a climate change adaptation strategy within the country. Am I making sense? So you can't just decide that because it's degraded, we're gonna houses. We're gonna put houses on it, or we're gonna put a mall there, right? What are the services it's providing now? What has it provided before? And if we were to invest in it, what would be the benefit the society receives? What would be the value of those benefits? Make clear.
Right. So based on that analysis you just gave now, would that factor in at this section of the evaluation or somewhere later on?
Well, you would still have to start off with a TEV. What is the TEV of the space? The question is, knowing the TEV, knowing that this is what it is now, but if we invested $10 million in it, this is the values, this is the services that we will get. And this would be the value of these future services if we made an investment. And it will be a natural climate change adaptation strategy. So would it be better to invest in it and utilize it as an ecosystem-based adaptation tool? Or would it be better to just provide housing and we continuously pay to rehabilitate and to clean up after flood events, and we remain unprotected from climate change adaptation, unprotected from climate change. So it's not as simple as it looks, because it does carry with it a lot of different types of analyses. So what this simply is here is looking at your ecosystem and determining the use of that ecosystem. What are the characteristics of the ecosystem? What goods and services does it provide? And with this in front of you, as we have on the screen, you can then determine, how do I put an economic value on each of these things? And that is where it will carry a lot of assumptions, and it also will carry a lot of, like what ifs. Okay, so it's degraded, but what if we rehabilitated? What would be the benefits? What would be the flow of benefits? What if we didn't rehabilitate and we utilize this particular space because it's degraded for something else? What will be the losses? So for example, I don't know how many of you remembered where Emancipation Park is now. Remember, that used to be, for some of you who, that used to be where Carnival used to be kept years ago, right? So it was what? Ligony something. Anybody remember it, or you all just too young? Anybody remember? Everybody knows where Emancipation Park is, right?
Yes.
Right, Nadine.
Yes.
At least somebody around my age group. Jeez. Right. So you remember what it was, right? It was Ligony something. They used to call it Ligony something.
Yeah, it was essentially a dust bowl.
Right. Well, Aisha, you're not as old as me, so you to respond. But yes, it was essentially a dust bowl. And coming into the year 2000, Jamaica had these Millennium Development Projects. And one of the bright sparks in the country said, we can use that dust bowl and create a park, right? So we had Emancipation Park emerging. Did that dust bowl have any value to Kingston? Or was it just a dust bowl creating a nuisance, and then these carnival people come and stomp up on it once a year, and it's just, did it have any significance? Any value?
Yes, it's a land resource, so it must have value. While the land resource might be degraded, it's still a land resource, so it should have value.
What would have been, if we were to look at that dust bowl and look at the total economic value in front of us, what would have been its value? Would it have had, okay, so it had a direct use value, which was people stomping up on it once a year, throwing a party, etc. It was a horrible space. It was a dust bowl. It created a nuisance, etc. Was there any indirect use value to that dust bowl? Did it help with drainage in any way? Do you think it would have helped with absorption of water? Anybody? Coming from as far as Ligony and would have helped with absorption of water in New Kingston?
To some extent, yes, because they've increased the green coverage.
Right, so it did, because once that park was built, and I don't know if Rose, are you here? Rose
Yes,
will
I
tell
am.
you,
Yes.
right, you know Emancipation Park, right? Once the
Yes.
ribbon was cut on that park, what also happened? If you
Once the-
have a drop of rain in New Kingston, the entire halfway tree road gets flooded, right?
Flooded out.
Not
Right.
something that didn't happen before from people who were there before
Oh Lord. Can't
Emancipation
believe people
Park.
know this.
Huh?
Yes, that's true. The
So you
place
have
flood the whole road,
extensive
terribly
flooding by the
flood.
gas
Right.
station, by Burger King. So
Oh
people like
my God.
if a shower rain came down and they got stuck by Burger King and they were in Tasty on Halfway Tree Road, they better just stay at Tasty for the rest for
Sure.
quite a while, because the flooding, they cannot cross the road.
You have to take a vehicle to go across. You have to go in a vehicle.
Right. So it had a value, right? But we're
Yes.
saying that what prevails now is much nicer. It's more aesthetically pleasing, etc. So if we were to do a TV on that and it said, boy, it don't make sense, it has no value. However, if we were to create it does have some indirect use value because it does this. How then can we put a development in place that would keep or retain some of that value? Because what is the cost to society of that flooding? Every single time it rains, it ends up having wear and tear on your roads. It ends up causing a lot of traffic, which is loss of productive time. You can add the values, you can add the costs. So yes, we could have had Emancipation Park. We could have still had it. We could have still had some amount of concrete, but we could have retained
Design.
more of the,
Soft surfaces.
yeah, we could have had more porous surfaces to
Right.
allow for the flow, and designed it in a way that water would still
Design.
have been able
Right.
to come into the park in some way, not cause a nuisance, but actually percolate in the park, as opposed to just running at the side of the road parallel to the park and then finding its way, sort of downhill. If we think about it, it wouldn't find its way to PIOJ because that'll be kind of more uphill flows. Will kind of go down and then down further. Somebody's hand was up. Christina?
Yes, two questions. When you look at the economic value, do you only look at the positive economic value, but also the negative economic value? Because what you're saying right now with that dust bowl and its implication for flooding and probably disruption of productivity, etc., is that included in the valuation model to say why we should probably move to a more EbA type approach? One.
No, this informs. It would help to what it's doing is that we're saying we need to know the value of the natural resources, because that also helps us to inform EbA. The ecosystem. In other words, if we're looking at EbA, we would not have lost that dust bowl as a resource. We would have still had a park, but at the same time, we would have recognized that we want to ensure that we don't create something that causes the heat island effect. We're not going to create something that is going to make us, impact us in a way, with a change in climate. And so we have increased flooding. So you're saying that you're doing this thing to say, what is the value? How much of it can we lose? How much of it will or how much do we need to rehabilitate this resource that is basically a dead resource? But if we don't rehabilitate it, these are the impacts as it relates to flooding or storm surge etc., etc. If we rehabilitate it, this is how we need to rehabilitate it. We're going to put a housing community there. This is what we're going to do. Because these are the services we want to fix. So the services we want to get back. Okay. So it's
Okay,
about
I understand
understanding
that.
the intrinsic value of the resource, what exists now, and if we were to put resources into it to make it better, how much resources can we put? How much development can take place to allow for society, that aspect of society that wants the development, but also how can it also be a climate change adaptation strategy? So that's one of the uses of the NRV within the context of EbA. Get it? You're okay, Christina?
Yes. My second question is, can this methodology be applied to human modified ecosystems like agro-ecosystems or like a farming ecosystem, a farm, pretty much?
Can this what?
Can this methodology or tool, this economic valuation, be applied to like a farming system, the agro-ecosystem?
Yeah.
We can. Okay. All right. Thank you.
I'm seeing but I'm not sure what it is. Somebody says, are you talking to me? Is there a question in the chat? Or maybe I'm missing. So let me just leave it. All right. So let me just quickly, and I forgot to give you all your break, but I don't think you all are complaining. Let's just, I know we have like about 25 minutes before break. So let us look quickly at the NRV methods, and we're going to go into detail, we're going to discuss them a little bit, but we're looking at this is without, for those of you who don't know, this is just on the surface. What are the methods that can be used to value water filtration? So here it has 3: replacement cost, net factor income, production function, and we're going to go into these this afternoon. Water storage, replacement cost, net factor income, coastal protection, replacement cost, damage cost avoided, production function, net factor income, support to fisheries, net factor income, visual aesthetics, contingent valuation, and I'm sure you all have heard of things of willingness to pay. What is your willingness to pay to keep this resource? Biodiversity, contingent valuation, choice modeling, non-use existence value, contingent valuation, and choice modeling. And as we go through some of the methods, you would actually realize that the analysis behind them are quite simple. They're not as detailed as so this is a snapshot of the different methods. It's a snapshot because we're going to discuss the different methods in a little more detail. So when we talk about market prices and you look back at your total economic value and you mention things like fish or food or timber, most of those can be sold directly in a marketplace and we can determine what the price is, right? Just by in the marketplace. But of course, there are limitations to market prices as well, because we could think about things like subsidies. Subsidies is stored prices. It makes the price appear lower when that's not the actual price. But things like timber, water, etc., we can put a value on those using prices, bauxite, mineral ores, and so on. Those have direct market prices. So this is just simply, looking at the methods and saying what they are without going into really how you do them at this point. So when we talk about replacement cost, it's really what it is. It really is very simple. What's the cost of replacing this environmental service with a man-made service? Which ecosystems have a man-made equivalent? So can we, I know there are some engineers among us, which ecosystem services have a man-made replacement? So here it says coastal protection, water infiltration. What else? And what are those replacements? So we're saying if we lose the resource, we can replace it, right? Or we can value the loss, losing the resource based on the replacement cost. That's clear? So the value of this coastal area is based on the cost to replace, using some man-made equivalent to replace the service that the coast provides. So I think that thing on Palisados, that coastal protection, right? Is that sort of like a replacement cost? Were there mangroves there? Anybody?
There are mangroves there.
There were, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what could we estimate the value of those mangroves that were there with the coastal protection that was provided there? Could we say that the value of it, if we get rid of the mangroves, the value of those mangroves, we can replace those mangroves with this particular man-made equivalent. So we could have said that that's the value of the mangrove. Is that kind of clear?
Okay.
Yeah, no?
Yeah.
What do you think is damage cost avoided? So we see here coastal protection by mangroves and coral reef. Could we give the value of a coral reef based on the damage from a hurricane? If we were to think of Hurricane Ivan, for example, and we said Hurricane Ivan, what was the cost of Hurricane Ivan? Was that the one that was 8% of GDP, or was that higher? If that coral reef was intact, right? Would we have had that cost, for example?
Isn't that a complicated question because we're so data deficient?
Let's think that we're not data deficient.
Okay.
Let's be, let's.
Yes, we could. We could.
So if you think of a coral reef, what we're basically saying is that the value of the coral reef is equal to the cost of the damage avoided. So the cost of the damage, if the reef is non-functional or deficient, the cost of the damage is equated to the cost of the reef. You understand?
Yep.
I get what you're saying to an extent. I think I'm just trying to wrap my mind around how you are going to have an idea of what is avoided or what.
Okay, so damage cost avoided. We're saying that we could determine the value of a reef based on the damage that the country receives from, say, for example, a hurricane. So we're saying if the reefs around the island was intact, the damage that we receive, being hypothetical here, for example, from Hurricane Ivan, the cost of the damage received from Hurricane Ivan would not have been that cost, right? So that's the value of the coral reef. We would have avoided those costs or that level of damage and the costs associated with repair and reconstruction if the coral reefs are intact. So that's the concept of using damage costs avoided. We would have avoided the damage and the associated costs if our reefs were healthy.
All right, and is your explanation different from possibly looking at an area in which the ecosystems are intact and saying if these were not here, then the loss of the spaces, the infrastructure, there would be this. If
Right,
these
it
were
could be,
here, is that?
it's a similar analysis, yes. So if we get rid of this ecosystem, there is a possibility that this can happen. But if we want to do that analysis as well, where do you think we can get some of that information from? Let's say we want to convince our policymakers not to build, let's say, and you all don't overthink it, because I think you're kind of overthinking some of it. We want to convince them not to build hotels in the sea. And we want to say to them that if you did that, it would impact the reef, and this would be the cost, this would be the damage. But so in this case, we're assuming we have perfectly intact reefs, and we're going to be putting in this structure, and we want to say to them, no, don't put it in, because whilst you won't damage the reefs if you put it in, initially, we're going to have some impact on the reefs, and it may cause X, Y, and Z. Where can we get that kind of data to especially since, who said it, Rachel, that we have all of these gaps in data, we're data poor. Where you think we can get some of that information from? But while you think about that, I'm going to ask Adrian to go ahead. Go ahead, Adrian.
Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so it's interesting that you ask about data, because I mean, sometimes, the gaps are there in data, well, locally or regionally, but I'm sure that international institutions or organizations will at some point or in some way would have been involved in, having data for, whether for Jamaica or the region, regarding this, and it might, or to some degree or to a large degree, expedite in assisting in this endeavor. So basically, there might be gaps, there might be gaps based on data, whether it's unavailable or or there's a deficit of it, whether locally or regionally. But international organizations may possibly be more robust in having data already, or even data is current on this, into assisting these endeavors. I hope I'm making sense in any way.
Okay, let me ask you a question. They may have data on your country?
Not just Jamaica, but whether Jamaica or any country in the region or in the Caribbean region.
So you're saying they can take that data and you can take that data and apply it to this situation?
Yeah, to a large degree, and it also depends on how up to date the data is, because let's just say data on coral reef damage or data on environmental damage. If the data is current, and if the trends are sufficient, or for example, if there's sufficient data over a period of decades, this can be used to assist in determining what policy action should be taken to mitigate against any adverse effects or so forth. That is, of course, the thing is that international institutions are more robust in this kind of thing, because they have the resources as well as capital, not just financial capital, but human capital to do this. So that, yes, to answer your question, it would really, because well, locally data might be short or lacking, but international institutions do are having data internationally from such organizations can to a large extent assist in informing what kind of policy actions needed to be taken. I hope I'm making sense. Am I on the right track?
Well, I'm not sure, because a lot of the data that the international agencies would have on your country would be derived from data that you give to them or they have.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
That's in
So
a
they
large
may do
part.
analyses and forecasting to look at and see, well, if you said the state of your watershed was X.
Right.
Then
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
we through our we can then factor in your GDP. They will put in your GDP growth, your rate of develop, the growth of the construction sector, and then they may downscale the state of your environment based on that, especially if there is no existing or no new policy on the environment, etc. But I was going somewhere else with
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because because usually data that's of that nature, as you rightly outlined, usually come from public institutions most of the time. But what about universities or independent researchers, or at least independent researchers that are valid and reliable? Yeah.
That's where I wanted to go, because one of the ways in making that decision, pretty similar to what you're saying, is this notion called benefits transfer, where you can look at something similar. So we're looking at saying that we should not do this particular development, this overwater development, because of the potential impact on our coral reefs. We're trying to convince our policymakers not to do it. The question now becomes, can we transfer what has been done in another jurisdiction and apply it to Jamaica? So it's this notion of benefits transfer, where you look at studies done on a similar situation, similar construction, similar thing, and you transfer the benefits and you use that to undertake the analysis. So it's called benefits transfer.
Right, I'm just learning the term. Thanks. I'll just jot that down. Thank you.
Okay, Carlton, your hand was up.
I was just he made a suggestion of the university, but in practicing, we found that, for example, with mangroves, we're looking at stuff like carbon sequestration and productivity for mangroves and seagrass, then the data from one region might not be reflective of what we have here. So you might either overestimate or underestimate. And that makes the assessment, in my mind, subjective. So for me, until we start getting local data, I think the assessment tend to be more subjective.
It's not as accurate as you want it to be, for sure, because what you have brought in is the limitations when you don't have the data.
Right. But as I said, looking at universities and stuff is probably a way to look at.
Yeah, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. It's interesting that you brought up the whole idea of regions, because if you're looking at regions, there might be, even between countries in a region, there will be spatial differences. So as you rightly suggested, what we need is a more robust approach, or even a more comprehensive and cross sector approach in how to accurately not only record but monitor and make documentation of the data. So yeah, basically that's my take on it.
Okay. And we'll go into a lot more discussion when we come back from lunch. So another one is net factor income. So it's saying here, this is a valuation method. And some of these are more complex than others, because I think this one is kind of complex, where you're taking the revenue from sales of an environmental related good minus the cost of other inputs. And when I think of valuing a resource, using this method, there are some examples here, but I always think about the coral reef and snorkeling and scuba diving. And how can we use net factor income to determine the part of the tourism aspects of the coral reef? So what are the revenue from sales of environment-related goods? And we can even begin to think about the reef as the builder of beaches. So what's the revenue from sales of environment-related goods? It may be the value of a portion of the value of your tourism product, right? If we get micro and we look at snorkeling and scuba diving, the value, the revenue from sales of, you know, taking tourists out to scuba dive minus all the equipment for scuba diving will give you that value related to the recreational value of the coral reef, okay? The recreational value of the coral reef could also be related to the beaches and the hotels and the benefits that they derive from having a beach, for example. But such a thing, net factor income, this is where, for example, you could begin to get things like double counting, etc. Or you have limitations. You may overestimate or underestimate based on the revenue from sales, etc. So that is one. Production function is one that I particularly like. The estimated value of an ecosystem service as input in production of a marketed good. So this is where if Adrian is online, production function can help you determine the value of all your bees, because the bee is a vital input in the production of all agricultural products or most agricultural products. So the value of our agriculture in Jamaica is the value of pollination in Jamaica and the value of the bee in Jamaica could be directly related to the value of our agricultural production. Make sense?
Go again with that definition, Elizabeth, or that explanation.
So let's say we want to say, what is the value of pollination services? And let us look at an arbitrary example. So let's say we decide that, and Adrian, I'm using your example. I'm using you as the example. Let's say we're gonna, so Adrian, where are your bees? In Seaview, St. Thomas, where? Okay, let's use St. Thomas and say that there's a big, bright idea to get rid of a particular set of land where we know, for example, there are a lot of bees, beekeeping services, etc., beekeepers, etc., because we want to build a fancy hotel, or we want to build we want to build an amusement park. So we're getting rid of that ecosystem. We're getting rid of what is there. We're getting rid of the beekeepers because they're a nuisance, and we're building this amusement park. How do we estimate the value of the service that the bees provide? The value of the service. So what would be your argument to say that even if you're going to build this amusement park, you need to have a portion of the park that allows for beekeeping and integrate it into your design, etc. Because if we lose this service of this particular pollinator, it will impact agriculture. And the value of the agriculture it impacts would be between St. Thomas, St. Mary, Portland, etc. And the value of that, we can estimate it based on the value of agriculture that's coming from those areas. So you're using a marketed good to determine the value of the ecosystem service. In this case, we're using agriculture.
Okay, so agriculture would be the function.
No, agriculture is the marketed good.
Okay.
You can buy and sell agriculture. I mean, not agriculture, agricultural produce. So if, for example, the bees pollinated all the, I don't know what's produced on that side. Let's say pollinated, I don't know, all the gongo beans. Let's use that as the example.
Mango.
Then the
mangoes,
value,
mangoes, yeah.
Let's use the mangoes, and let's say we export mangoes and we get $1 million from mangoes each year. from that particular region. The value of the pollinators in that region, we're saying, is directly related to the value of the mangroves. So we're saying the pollination service is equivalent to $1 million, because without that pollinator, we would lose $1 million in sales.
Okay, got you.
The other one is hedonic pricing. This is interesting because it estimates this is very common, in the housing market. Right? We go into a little more detail later, but what we're looking at is saying that we can estimate the value of a scenery or based on location. So you're using location to estimate the value of the environment. So in other words, we could build two very similar houses looking exactly the same, one by the beach and one by the beach and one in, I don't know, give me a name of a place. Let's say Tivoli. Beautiful houses, nice houses. Why would one sell for $80 million and the same house sell for $10 million?
The value of the land or the community.
But no, yeah.
Location.
What about location? And the value of the land is based on what?
The location.
No, but what
Perceptions of the
value of the
location.
location based on?
Perceptions of the location and access to amenities.
That's right, yeah, access to amenities, perception of the location.
Also the scenery.
The scenery.
Security.
But one of the things with hedonic pricing and the pricing of locations is the influence of the environment. So if where you live has nice air, clean air, it's close to different things, it has a nice view. So where you live, for example, you could see the whole of Kingston into Haiti and wherever. The naturals, Roseanne said in the chat, the naturalness of the space, that sort of gives you a sense of the environmental value of the space, okay? So I know it's 12:30 now, so we're on break. But we will come back, because when we come back, we're going to go into each one into a little detail and sort of look at how they're calculated, but not in great detail, if you know what I mean. Just to give you an idea and to look at some of the assumptions behind how we make decisions related to natural resources. Okay, any questions? Dion, you speaking? Michaela, that's an old hand. Anybody else? So I will leave you here now for your lunch break, and we come back at 2. And when we come back at 2, we go into each of the methods. Market pricing, replacement costs, what exactly it is, etc. And some examples.